Welcome back to Love, Life, and Legacy, the podcast dedicated to helping you navigate these hypersexualized times of ours. And in today's episode, we're going to do two parts. I have an episode for you that is very dense in information. It's fun and it's action-packed, but it's also a lot of important information. And I didn't want to shove it all into one episode because that's what I do sometimes when I give my talks live. I try to say too much information and I overwhelm people because I'm just so excited. So I'm trying to pace myself here. And this is a two-parter and it's all about connection. Connection seems like this massively important, like probably the most important thing that humans can ever be is connected. It's like the state in which we need to be in order for things to work out. Connected to other people to create solutions to problems, connected to God in order for us to feel our value, connected to ourselves in order to know our place in the universe, this kind of stuff. But we know how important connection is on some level, and yet we don't really prioritize it. So that's why in this episode, I want to really unpack what is connection and how do we find it and how do you create more connection in your life so you can be more fulfilled, make better decisions, and stay so far away from addiction, because the opposite of addiction is connection. And we're going to get into all that in this two-parter episode. Let's go. Welcome back, everybody. Andrew Love here. And today we're going to do another deep dive into a particular topic. I'm doing this together with you because there's certain topics that are so important in terms of building sexual integrity, in terms of building a sustainable life that you enjoy, that you don't want to run away from. We need to not only understand topics, but they need to resonate with us as just being a deep truth. And so I want to talk about connection because at the very beginning of our journey as High Noon, before we were High Noon, before we were anything, a group of 40 of us met at this summit called the Set Free Summit. And all of us were exposed to this idea that the opposite of addiction is connection. And I never forgot that. It's been in our talks ever since. But only after saying this and knowing it to be true on some level and repeating it for years and years and years, only recently in the past 2-3 years have I really been like, wait, but what is connection? What this thing that's so important? What is it? How do we get it? And why would it be so hard if it's so vital? So I want to unpack today what is connection and how do we get it? And I want to do it together with you and together with some experts. So I have different clips from speakers and we're going to add some music to this so it feels nice, because I want this to not just feel like homework, but rather like we are going on a voyage towards figuring out what is connection generally, but then more specifically, how can you, dear listener, dear High Nooner, how do you find it for yourself, get it, and sustain it, this thing known as connection? So for this first clip, I wanted to shoot out to a clip of a guy who gave a TED Talk many years ago at around the exact same time that we were at this Set Free Summit. And he's the guy that popularized the notion that the opposite of addiction is connection. So let's hear it from the horse's mouth. I hope the guy that doesn't mind that I'm calling him a horse.
Professor Alexander explained to me, the idea of addiction we've all got in our heads, that story, comes partly from a series of experiments that were done earlier in the 20th century. They're really simple experiments. You can do them tonight when you go home if you feel a little bit sadistic. You get a rat and you put it in a cage and you give it 2 water bottles. One is just water and the other is water laced with either heroin or cocaine. If you do that, the rat will almost always prefer the drugged water and almost always kill itself quite quickly. So there you go, right? That's how we think it works. In the 70s, Professor Alexander comes along and he looks at this experiment and he noticed something. He said, we're putting the rat in an empty cage. It's got nothing to do except use these drugs. Let's try something a bit different. So Professor Alexander built a cage that he called Rat Park, which is basically heaven for rats, right? They've got loads of cheese. They've got loads of colored balls. They've got loads of tunnels. Crucially, they've got loads of friends. They can have loads of sex. And they've got both the water bottles, the normal water and the drugged water. But here's the fascinating thing. In Rat Park, they don't like the drugged water. They almost never use it. None of them ever use it compulsively. none of them ever overdose. You go from almost 100% overdose when they're isolated to 0% overdose when they have happy and connected lives. Now, when he first saw this, Professor Alexander thought, maybe this is just a thing about rats. They're quite different to us, maybe not as different as we'd like, but, but fortunately, there was a human experiment into the exact same principle happening at the exact same time. It was called the Vietnam War. In Vietnam, 20% of all American troops were using loads of heroin. And if you look at the news reports from the time, they were really worried because they thought, my God, we're going to have hundreds of thousands of junkies on the streets of the United States when the war ends. It made total sense. Now, those soldiers who were using loads of heroin were followed home. The Archives of General Psychiatry did a really detailed study on what happened to them. It turns out they didn't go to rehab. They didn't go into withdrawal. 95% of them just stopped.
That was a man named Johannes Hari. Excuse my pronunciation. And I think it's pretty amazing to see that this experiment with the rats, also experiment with humans in terms of the Vietnam War, was very telling about how important our actions are in relation to our connection with other people. That when we're in isolation, we make much worse choices than when we are feeling connected. So now I want to go to somebody that Johan actually mentioned.
People are cut off.
That was the voice of Bruce Alexander, the man that Johan Hari mentioned in his talk, the doctor that he'd been discussing this rat experiment in Vietnam. And he gets into, in this clip, discussing how disconnection really works en masse, how our society at large is disconnected and why that's happening.
For example, many people are cut off from their families, and many people are cut off from being able to trust their nation, and many people are cut off from religion, and many people are cut off from just a local community, a community in which people are supportive. And so I use the word dislocation for that because I suppose it's a medical metaphor. It's like your shoulder could be dislocated. That doesn't mean it's amputated. It's still there. Your arm is still there, but doesn't articulate anymore. And that's what I mean. That many people are not articulating very well with their society. And we could say, well, that's their fault. They're not trying hard enough. But it isn't that. It's that happens in societies to masses of people at the same time. That's the true epidemic of our time, which is that we have so many people who are really not sustained by their communities and all the rest of it.
So I want to take us now from this broader understanding of being disconnected to something more specific, something really at the heart of High Noon's work, which is our addictions to cell phones and technology in general. This clip is from a guy named Simon Sinek, which you probably know. He's everywhere. You can't escape him. I have mixed feelings about him. He's pretty cool, but he's kind of annoying. But anyway, in this clip, it's him likening cell phones and addiction to cell phones to alcohol.
We're starting to see rises of depression in this generation. We're starting to see a rise of suicide in this generation. We're starting to see a rise of accidental death due to drug overdose from this generation. Now, those are all extreme examples. The less extreme and more likely example is that someone will go through life just never really finding joy or fulfillment. And everything's just fine. How's your job? It's fine. How are your friends? They're fine. Because joy, fulfillment comes from this. It comes from human interaction. We are social animals and we need it. We have age restrictions on alcohol. We have age restrictions on smoking, and we have age restrictions on gambling. We have no age restrictions on this other dopamine-producing device called social media or cell phones. It's the equivalent of throwing open the liquor cabinet and telling our young adolescents, I know this is a stressful time. Try the vodka. It'll get you through these hard times.
And now back to Johan Hari to elaborate more on why, even though we are so connected through social media, we are not in fact connected.
And it might sound weird to say, I've been talking about how disconnection is a major driver of addiction. Well, weird to say it's growing because you think, well, we're the most connected society there's ever been, surely. But I increasingly began to think that the connections we have, we think we have, are like a kind of parody of human connection. If you have a crisis in your life, you'll notice something. It won't be your Twitter followers who come to sit with you. It won't be your Facebook friends who help you turn it round. It'll be your flesh and blood friends who you have deep and nuanced and textured face-to-face relationships with. And I think there's a study I learned about from Bill McKibben, the environmental writer, I think tells us a lot about this. It looked at the number of close friends the average American believes they can call on in a crisis. That number has been declining steadily since the 1950s. The amount of floor space an individual has in their home has been steadily increasing. And I think that's like a metaphor for the choice we've made as a culture, right? We've traded floor space for friends. We've traded stuff for connections. And the result is that we are one of the loneliest societies there has ever been. And yet Bruce Alexander, the guy who did the Rat Park experiment, says, we talk all the time in addiction about individual recovery. And it's right to talk about that. But we need to talk much more about social recovery. Something's gone wrong with us, not just as individuals, but as a group. And we created a society where for a lot of us, life looks a whole lot more like that isolated cage and a whole lot less like Rat Park.
I have another great speaker that I'd like to expose you to.
There is so much at stake around human connection.
Molly's talking about the ramifications of not being connected as individuals and as a society, and how detrimental it is to our physical, mental, and spiritual well-being.
Since 1999, the suicide rate is up 33%. Teen suicide is up 70%. 70. Loneliness is a greater detriment to our health than smoking, obesity, and high blood pressure. Depression is one of the leading causes of disability worldwide. In 1985, 1 in 10 people said they had no one intimate to talk to. And now it is 1 in 4. And science and the data is telling us that human connection can help solve a lot of these issues. Our brains are wired to reach out and interact. The reward centers light up when we have connection. So when you can interact intimately and honestly with your friends and your family and your community, you strengthen your immune system, you recover from disease faster, and you actually live longer. And human connection absolutely lowers our rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide ideation. We all need to strengthen our connection muscle. But how do we do this? Well, for me, it came down to the basics of being a human being. It revolves around 3 things: giving space to all of our feelings, telling the truth, and realizing we are not alone.
And then there's this guy.
We live in a toxic culture.
If you don't know who that is, it's Gabor Mate. He's been very influential in my understanding and High Noon's understanding of addiction. And in this clip that I found for you, he's helping to make the distinction between abstinence and sobriety, real sobriety. And the reason why I want to have this right before our next section about types of connection is because when so many people come to High Noon, they want to be abstinent. They want to become free from watching porn. That's their goal. But we've tried to explain this in many different ways. That is not a goal. The absence of something, a bad habit, doesn't mean that you're fulfilled or happy in any way. It's a very different world. So I've tried to explain this ad nauseum. So why not have somebody far more credentialed than me to explain it in his own words?
I make a distinction between abstinence and sobriety. People become abstinent, but that doesn't mean they become sober. Like, abstinence is good. It means you're not using something to temporarily escape from yourself. That's good. You're not getting drunk. You're not getting stoned. That's good. But that's not the same as sobriety. Sobriety is a real capacity of conscious presence. So you can become abstinent without being consciously present. That's the first point. The second point is, as you and I have been agreeing in this conversation, the addictions are always a form of coping, of escape. As you just said, when all of a sudden you stop using the addiction, it doesn't mean that all the problems you've been trying to escape have gone away. You've just taken away a powerful coping mechanism for a good reason, because the same coping mechanism was creating more problems for you. That's true. But all that pain, all that turmoil, the lack of inner peace that you're experiencing before you become addicted, are still going to be there. In fact, because you're abstinent now, you're going to really feel them in a way that maybe you've never been felt before. So now you have to work your way through that to the traumatic source. So it's actually with abstinence that the work actually begins.
When the night has come.
One analogy that really came to me while I was thinking deeply about this connection is that the act of feeling connected, and I'll get into how that looks, but when you feel truly connected, it's like an artery in your body that is pumping beautiful feelings and inspiration and just a sense of ease in your life. And when you are not connected, when you're feeling disjointed and disconnected from the world around you, from the people in your lives, from God, it's like that artery is clogged and things stop flowing. Things stop flowing around your spiritual body, around your mind. Your mind feels stuck. Your heart feels stuck. That's why it has so many detrimental effects in terms of our physical well-being, our spiritual and mental well-being. It's a clog. It's because we're pinching off that connection to what makes us thriving human beings. All right, so we've gone over a lot of ground here in terms of figuring out what is the importance of connection. But now I want to figure out together with you, what types of connection do we have the option to ascertain? How do we even know where to look, right? So I'm going to boil this down into 3 categories: connection to self, connection to others, and connection to God. And I also want to add some sub-definitions of connection to yourself. Means the individual you, but it also means the God within yourself, the divinity within yourself, not just the you who gets up, who likes a certain type of breakfast, not that you, but the you that will exist for all of eternity, this divine eternal self within. And connecting to others means, of course, talking to people, and you can have acquaintances and all this, but also experiencing the divinity of God in other people. And then lastly, to experience God in general can go many different directions. So in order to help me explain, I actually got our staff and a secret guest to get some quotes from the Bible and then to record themselves. So this next clip is somebody very special, somebody that I love very much. It is my beloved wife reading True Mother's words.
I want you to help me. Please develop your talent and expertise. Protect your purity. Grow up healthy and beautiful. Become the beautiful fruit of our unification culture. If you do these things, I will feel so happy to have come and spoken to you. Heavenly Parent has been suffering for 6,000 years, wandering around after having lost his and her children. I am carrying that inside me. I want you to comfort me. Will you do that?
I really love that clip because my wife, I asked her to run upstairs and record this with me real quick. And so she was completely winded while she was recording. But that was a quote when True Mother was speaking to the European second generation. This was a few years ago. And you can really see that she's advising people. This is like connecting to yourself. She's talking about, first of all, develop your talents, but also protect your purity. How interesting that it's not just about becoming a great person in society, but protect your purity, right? And she's challenging young people to do this as a condition to be a blossomed, fruitful individual, which is, as you know in the Divine Principle, the first blessing. So to connect with yourself has in it parts of the challenge to protect what is good and to nurture that, but also to become more so that you can influence the world around you. So we're going to stop there for today, and stay tuned for the next episode where we really do a deep dive into how to find connection, to stay fulfilled, to live a meaningful life. I'll see you next week.
Hey guys, there are a lot of nonprofits and fundraisers out there, but High Noon is something special, don't you think? If you want to contribute to something, if you've wanted to give back in some way, then look no further, because High Noon is your place. We're still a nonprofit, guys, and our programs and our events and workshops really run off of you. So please consider becoming a donor. Actually, no, become a donor, please, my friend, especially if you've benefited from this podcast, which is totally free, and our programs that are totally free. Then go to highnoon.org/donate, and you can become a donor for just $10 a month, or $20 a month, or $1,000 a month, whatever your wallet can do, and whatever you want to give back and contribute. All right, become a donor, join the club, and see you.